In the summer of 711 AD, the Visigothic kingdom of Hispania stood on the brink of dissolution, though few of its nobles fully grasped the danger. For nearly 3 centuries, the Visigoths had ruled most of the Iberian Peninsula as heirs to Rome, inheriting Roman institutions while struggling to maintain unity among a fractious aristocracy. The kingdom had no stable system of succession. Kings were elected by nobles and bishops, and every royal death carried the risk of civil war. It was this internal fragility, more than any overwhelming foreign force, that set the stage for the upcoming battle at Guadalete. When the Visigoth king Roderic rode south at the head of his host, he believed he was marching to suppress a simple raid. What he and his men didn't know was that what awaited them would change the very course of history in the Iberian Peninsula for centuries to come. The young King Roderic led his host of Visigothic troops toward this foreign invasion. His force was large by contemporary standards, perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 men, though exact numbers of the battle are uncertain. It included 3 divisions of noble retainers, levies, and a heavy cavalry corps, the traditional strength of Visigothic warfare. The invaders, the Umayyad Caliphate, awaited patiently for the arrival of Roderic and his men. The Umayyads were led by Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq had set up his force to mirror that of the Visigoths, 3 separate divisions. His force was mainly Berber cavalry from North Africa, as well as sizable contingents of light and heavy Arab infantry. Tariq commanded a force of possibly 10,000 to 12,000 men on the field that day. The 2 armies met just north of a river, traditionally identified as the Guadalete, though its exact location remains debated by historians. Some scholars favor the Barbate River or the Laguna de la Janda area in modern Andalusia. Although the invading Umayyads were fewer in number, their men were unified by their shared purpose. They were bound by discipline and confident by the certainty that God favored their cause. Tariq's men were also hardened veterans of years of desert warfare, whereas most of the Visigothic troops, primarily the infantry, had been recently assembled levies with little to no battle experience. The battle would commence on a late July afternoon. Tariq ordered his Berber cavalry forward to skirmish the Visigothic lines. The Berber cavalry were light, extremely mobile, and accustomed to rapid maneuver and fierce assault. They peppered Roderic's right and left flank relentlessly. Roderic's men returned fire but were not as effective as the swift Berber riders. The effective hit-and-run tactics of the Berber riders continued on for hours. Umayyad commander Tariq ibn Ziyad recognized that his force was heavily outnumbered. Therefore, his plan was to utilize the superiority of his rapid light cavalry to wither down the front lines of the much larger Visigoth force before any head-on engagement would commence. Ultimately, this strategy proved to be effective as the Berber riders had inflicted far more casualties to Roderic's force as they had lost. Having suffered losses in the skirmish, Roderic composed himself and steadied his men. He sent word to his fellow commanders on the flanks to prepare for a frontal attack. And with that, he gathered his troops at the center and advanced toward the Umayyad lines. His central force of heavy Visigoth cavalry led the charge, followed closely by heavy infantry with Roderic in the midst of the formation. His flanks also advanced, but at a much slower pace, trailing behind the center, seeming almost as though they didn't want to fully commit to the battle. Written sources from the Mozarabic Chronicle, written perhaps 40 years after the battle took place, indicates that there was some internal rivalry between the Visigothic nobles in Roderic's army, many of which held no love for the young king, and perhaps saw this battle as an opportunity to usurp his throne. The Visigoth heavy cavalry smashed into the Umayyad lines, knocking the disciplined heavy Arab infantry back in their place. Roderic and the rest of the central force followed and committed to the battle. Tariq's men held at the center but were vastly outnumbered, so much so that they couldn't be expected to hold their ground for long. With almost a flawless execution, the Berber cavalry and infantry on the flanks excelled forward in unison. They saw a hesitant Visigothic force on the flanks that was unwilling to commit to the fight. The Berbers wasted no time and swiftly pounced on the obvious weakness. Both the Umayyad right and left flanks swarmed forward. They penetrated deep into the flanks of the Visigothic lines. At this point in the battle, the Visigothic center was fully engaged with the Umayyad center. They continued to push forward, gaining ground against Tariq's contingent. Roderic and his men seemed completely oblivious to what was occurring on their flanks. Either Visigothic commanders lost cohesion of their forces, or perhaps this was their plan all along. Regardless, Tariq's men pushed their advantage against their uncommitted foe. It was at this point in the battle that things for the Visigoths, particularly Roderic and his own contingent, would begin to dissolve. It was not precisely known for sure among historians as to what happened next, but two ancient sources, the Chronicle of Alfonso III, among the Mozarabic chronicles, state that the Visigothic commanders on Roderic's flanks had conspired against him. Once he was killed in the battle, that they would then gain his territories as well as power for themselves. Perhaps in fact this was not the case, and in fact the Visigoth commanders may have been outclassed by the more experienced and superior Muslim forces, and that the Visigoth flanks collapsed due to a loss of cohesion, resulting in an unorderly retreat to preserve their own lives. Whatever the real reason behind this collapse is unfortunately forever lost in history. With the catastrophic breakdown of the Visigoth flanks, King Roderic and his men at the center were now exposed and at the mercy of the entire Muslim force. Tariq seized the moment. His cavalry swiftly closed the distance and fully encircled the Visigoths. Muslim troops surged forward with ferocious discipline. The Visigothic center buckled under the pressure. Roderic and his men fought on, refusing to flee, but the collapse spread like fire. Panic followed. Men cast aside shields and tried to flee, but by this stage it was too late. They were fully surrounded and forced to fight for their survival. By the end of the battle, after days of fighting, the Visigothic army had ceased to exist as a coherent force. King Roderic vanished, presumed dead, his body never certainly identified. With him died not only a king, but the authority of the Visigothic state. The victors stood stunned amid the wreckage. Tariq had not merely won a battle, he had shattered a kingdom. Before him lay the cities of Hispania, undefended and rich. When news reached Musa ibn Nusayr, the Umayyad governor, he crossed into Hispania in 712 with a larger army. Organized Visigothic power had effectively ceased to exist. Within a decade, nearly the entire peninsula, except for mountainous regions in the north, was under Muslim rule. The Battle of Guadalete was not merely a military defeat. It was the culmination of internal decay within the Visigothic state. The battle's outcome was shaped as much by political fragmentation as by battlefield tactics. From the Muslim perspective, the victory inaugurated Al-Andalus, which would become one of the most culturally and economically vibrant regions of medieval Europe. From the Christian perspective, Guadalete became a symbol of catastrophe, often mythologized in later chronicles as divine punishment or treachery, marking the beginning of centuries of struggle to reclaim the peninsula. Despite the legendary embellishments that surround it, Guadalete remains one of the most consequential battles in European history. A brief encounter whose effects reshaped Iberia, the Western Mediterranean, and the balance between Christendom and Islam for generations.